Dr. David Clements has a Master of Mathematics, a Master of Advanced Studies, and a Doctor of Philosophy that he has gained from universities in England, Sussex, Oxford, and Cambridge. In the year 2000, after he had been practicing as a theoretical physicist in string theory, he began remote viewing and began his communications with extraterrestrials from the Pleiades and from Arcturus, and much later he began communicating with a group called the Elohim, and they have helped him develop advanced technologies that will help with healing and many other ways in which our planet can move forward into a Star Trek future.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Dr. Clements, or David, to Exopolitics Today.
Hello, Michael, and hello to your audience as well.
Well, you have a really fascinating background. I mean, you have quite a pedigree there with all those advanced degrees. So you want to tell us about your background in theoretical physics and the degrees that you did?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of an odd upbringing because to start from the very beginning, it's kind of a funny story because I never used to be mathematical or science orientated at all. And one of the leaving words that my mum used to joke about when I left primary school is the head teacher said, "This guy will never be a mathematician." It was really of a completely different mindset, and that didn't even enter the field. But from a young age, I had a very extraordinary interest in UFOs. Everything to do with the subject, I just wanted to know everything I could about it. And as time went on, some things seemed to happen. I wasn't consciously aware that anything had happened. I wasn't aware or had any memories of any experiences or anything like that. But something just switched on, and I went from being very artistic and creative to suddenly just straight into anything complicated, conceptual, mathematical, and physics related. It just switched on. And then I went from, that side into full on into the camp of mathematics and theoretical physics. So when I started, I did a degree, I did effectively 2 degrees. So I did a degree in mathematics and a degree in physics at the same time, side by side, which everybody thought I was a bit crazy doing, but I really felt impulsed to do that. And I went through that, and then I bolted another year on top of that, which is the Master of Mathematics, to get the Master of Mathematics degree. And at that time, again, I was still heavily interested in everything UFOs. I looked at the Bob Lazar stuff, which was kind of around that time was just starting to come out, and anything to do with any of those fields, I was just lapping it up. I was just really intrigued by the whole area of that, those ideas and those people that were involved in them. But at this point, I had no idea of a concept of a higher self, multidimensionality, any of this stuff. I was still heading into becoming a professional theoretical physicist. And then I went to Cambridge, and at that time, the late Professor Stephen Hawking was the chair of the department I was in there. So I got to sort of cross paths with him a few times. And with a lot of sort of bigwig mainstream theoretical physicists, and those were quite interesting experiences. And still, then I was still paralleled my interest in the UFO fields with doing mainstream studies and wanting to become a professional theoretical physicist. But then once I got to Oxford to do my PhD, sometime in about the first year, my thesis was on string theory, as you mentioned, and so I was studying fundamental particle physics as particles being vibrating strings, which is a very popular, as I'm sure you well know, area of study that's been going on for many years now. But something just kind of didn't feel it didn't sit with me very well. The more I looked into it and the more I did my research, I just felt that there was something that wasn't tallying, something, because I really wanted to get to the bottom and lift the covers underneath how things work, how this universe was really operating. And I just wasn't seeing that in what I was doing. And so about a year in, I was getting these sort of uneasy, I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with this or what I'm going to do. And I really felt drawn to start looking at certain keywords on the internet to do with energy and energy in its deeper forms. And that's where I came across Tom Bearden, who is, I'm sure many of your audience will know. Oh, there they are. They're two universities. And so when I read his work, it blew me away. I thought, holy cow, are you guys actually doing what you're saying? And it was such a different world from what from these universities and these are very prestigious, very mainstream universities, And so I decided to contact him. I wrote to him. I wasn't expecting him to get back to me. I thought, he's not going to get back to somebody like me, And but I was really honored and blown away. He got back to me within a day, and he was so excited that I contacted him. And I said, are you really doing what you say that you're doing on your site? And he said, yeah, we are. And we're really excited that you've got in touch, because he had a lot of problems with mainstream criticism and all that kind of stuff. And, for those people who aren't aware of Tom Bearden, he has sadly passed away now, but he was a lieutenant colonel in the US Army. He did a tour in Vietnam, and really good guy, straight as an arrow, very honest. And that's the guy. Yeah. Really lovely guy, absolutely adamant about getting to the truth. And so we started a kind of relationship. We became friends, and he was very interested to see where I might take, this field and go with these ideas. So he sent me a ton of books, and he said, just read those, study those, and let's talk some more. I thought, okay, just added to my pile of reading I got to do. And it was fascinating, getting to know Tom and his world and his work was just such a privilege. And, it was just a wonderful experience that I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would ever have the opportunity to do. And anyway, so he said, well, we've got this group in the UK that are kind of, that he's sort of talking to, that were a mix of, some people with engineering backgrounds, some people who were mathematicians and so on. So he introduced me to them. So I had this kind of dual life when I was doing my mainstream work during the day, and during the night I'd put on my other hat, and then I would go off and work with these guys, And I kind of keep those lives separate because I wasn't sure how mainstream academia would take this. And I eventually started to come out and talk to a few people, a few professors, and just kind of test the water just to see how they would sit with this kind of thing. And as you can imagine, the reaction wasn't so great. But a couple of them were intrigued. They wanted to know more, but they were kind of saying, yeah, but you're never really going to get to do that here or anywhere else. You best just focus on what you're doing and toe the line kind of thing. But no, so needless to say, I didn't do that. And so I was working with these guys, and probably around 2000, maybe about towards the end of 2002, a friend of mine who knew my interest in UFOs and the energy work and things like that bought me a book for my birthday. And in there was a whole chapter about a whole bunch of things, but including remote viewing. And I thought, again, holy cow, are people actually doing this? I'd never heard of this before. So I thought, okay, I'm going to look and see if this is something that you can train to do. I'm interested in looking at this. Found a company in the US who was offering video kits that you could train yourself. So I thought, okay, I'll have a go, be open-minded and see how this takes me. And so I got this kit, once I got it, I started to have these amazing experiences straight off the bat. And one of the most particular ones was remote viewing a target, which turned out to be, well, I'll save that for a second, but I went into the center of the target and I could feel just immense rumbling sound in my ears. My feelings were saturated. I could feel hot liquid flowing through. Is as if my physical senses were actually located there, and I was getting super saturated by the target. So I thought, okay, I better put the pen down. I better stop this because this is getting a little bit over the top, you know. And I went into the kitchen, and the rumbling and the fierce sounds and all of the senses carried on. And I tried to have a normal conversation with a guy that was in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal and great. And I went back into my room, sat down, and it started to subside. Flipped over the photograph of the target. It was a volcano. So that, for me, was absolute proof positive. It's like there's no way all those sensations, every detail that I was experiencing was a fluke. So I thought, okay, this definitely does work. So I carried that on for a little bit. So I was doing that. I was doing my mainstream work, and I was also working with Tom at the same time. So I guess you could say I had a three-way life going on. And it's kind of interesting. So it's almost as if the remote viewing, in part, was an impulse to kick in my intuitive aspects and my wish to look further. And then I then started looking much more deeply into ET contact, and that's when my ET contact started to pick up. And so then oh, sorry, were you going to ask a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to encourage you to explain the ET contacts. And,
yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah, sure. So I thought, okay, well, maybe somewhere somebody is doing courses on you know, how to connect with the higher self, how to expand intuition, those kind of things. And I found somebody that wasn't too far away from me that I did a course with. And once I did that course, everything opened up. The Pleiadians came through, and they were very clear about the steps that were going to be taken. There was going to be a big journey of healing, and a lot of things needed to be cleared out of the way. I didn't really understand at the time, like I do now, obviously, because this was quite some time ago, where they were going to take this. But I just trusted, and I could hear them so clearly and so well, and I had a lot of visuals as well with what they were doing. So again, at this point, coupled with that, and the work with Tom, and, you know, at this point, my mind had been completely blown in a way and opened up to a whole world of energetics and what I now call living energetics that was so different from anything I had any chance of learning about in my mainstream academia. And there was a point where I kind of struggled to convince myself to finish what I was doing, because I felt that I was so now invested and convinced by what I was seeing outside of this. I thought, how can I, you know, stand up and truthfully say that this is what I'm believing in now? You know, it was a difficult situation.
Can you maybe elaborate? I mean, were you actually teaching at that time? I mean, what was the kind of professional work you were doing in string theory as you were having, you know, as you were doing the remote viewing, communicating with Tom Bearden? I mean, yeah. Are you teaching classes? Are you, what exactly are you doing in the profession?
Yeah, a mix of both, really. So I was teaching some students with different things in their subjects, but my main research was in string theory. So my research was looking at multidimensional theories with magnetic backgrounds to try to see if I could create string particle physics that matched what mainstream physics would see in the particle accelerators, basically. And so that's essentially what, you know, a lot of string theorists do today. They're trying to get this theory to click and fit in and make it match what they see experimentally. And so that was my research. So it was all mathematical, all pure theory. There was no experimentation to it whatsoever. But we were looking to try to connect it to what people were seeing in experimentation. And so, yeah, that was pretty much my research, my thesis that you can find online. I had a flick through it the other day. It's been so long. I thought, my goodness, I can't believe I actually did that. But
can you tell us about the remote viewing kit that you got? Yeah, what remote viewing school or personality has developed it?
Yeah, sure. The group that I went with, they claim to be some of the original, from the Stargate project, where they had the original remote viewers. I think 2 of them said they came from those circles and started a company called SciTech, I think it was at the time. I don't know if that still exists. I mean, I came away from that. I know now that my my higher self was sort of guiding me away from that area, because that was just an initial sort of kickoff. Because what I'll talk about later is they started to develop with me a different way of doing it, which was very necessary for the things that they wanted me to be able to perceive and download, and so it was almost like a toolkit that they needed me to kick off with. But then later on down the road, I would revisit this, and they would start retuning things and changing things so that I could perceive and do things like bilocation, which is very necessary for what they needed me to learn, so that they could give me the information they needed to give me. When we moved to New Zealand, there were a group of beings that were starting to teach me how to shift my consciousness while my body's still being in one place. And I could go to another location, which would either be with them, or it could be another place on the planet. And my ability to sense what I was there is very like as if I was actually there, but at the same time, being very full aware that my body was right here. So it was like an overlay, if you like, of a very clear perception of both audio, even smell and taste. I had some experiences which I can talk about a little bit later, if you like, about going down to inner Earth civilizations, where the tangibility of the smells and the tastes in the caverns where they were very strong, and it reminded me a lot of like when you actually go into a giant cave system yourself, the richness of negative ions, all those things, you can perceive them. So it's almost like taking your sensory package with you to where you go, but also being able to feel your physical senses where you're sitting right now as well.
Differentiate that from, say, an out-of-body experience with bilocation. In theory, someone at the other end would be able to see you.
That's a good question. I mean, when I connected with these beings, they were interacting with me as if I was kind of there. But to give a sort of an example, a lot of the cases, I wasn't actually aware of having a physical body while I was there. I had my sensorial abilities, but it almost felt like I was a floating sphere in a way. So that's the best I can describe. So I wasn't aware of I was physically walking around and doing things as a physical human being would. It was very different. So yeah, a sphere that had all this perceptive ability that I normally would down here, but also a lot of the communication was very telepathic. So a lot of the times they wouldn't move their mouths when they were talking. I would just hear their voices in my head, and I'd be able to hear that. Sometimes they would talk and I could see their mouths talking as they spoke. And then they would flip between, either telepathic or verbal communication. So yeah, that was pretty much the bilocation. And it was very important because they wanted me to see things, and they've been very clear about this in my learning with them and the teachings, is that it's very important to have the experience. They can't just tell me and give me blueprints and bits and pieces like that. They were very, even though in the beginning, my monkey mind wanted to know all the details and everything that was going on and pick it to pieces. And they were saying, no, we want you to just calm your mind down, have the experience, because there are a lot of energetics and levels that you need to experience here that if you just start going in with your mind, you will miss all of that. So yeah, definitely.
So you want to tell us about some of the different ET groups that you met as you were doing the remote viewing, the bilocating, and yeah, begin with the Pleiadians. I mean, what did they look like? I mean, how did they kind of energetically feel to you? And then you met the Arcturians. So you maybe just describe these different groups and
Sure.
how you would distinguish between those different groups.
It's a good question. So in the beginning, it was the ones that I was aware of were the Pleiadians. So I wasn't aware of the Arcturians coming in until probably maybe about a year after I started connecting with the Pleiadians. The Pleiadians had they had, how can I say, they usually had spacesuits on very similar to the one that you have on your website with they have a blue jumpsuit type uniform. Some of them would have different colorations like silver and other things near the shoulder patches. But mainly those are the kind of clothes that they were wearing. It was a mixture of males and females, beautiful skin, perfect skin. It was unblemished, and they were incredibly graceful, and this is one of the things, and it's interesting. I noticed you had that session with Elena on before about discerning what beings that you are connecting to. And for me, they've always encouraged me that whenever you connect with anyone or anyone tries to connect with you, to feel their energy or to ask your inner self to give you a snapshot of their energetics so that you can, it's almost like a quantum picture of their entire field in one, so that you can discern who are they? Are they who they say they are, and what is their core center? Are they heart-centered, or are they coming from somewhere else? You can really get to learn that, and that's something which they've been teaching me a lot. Now with the Pleiadians, very gentle, highly compassionate people, very intelligent, but very patient as well. There's a few things that they took a while to get me to perceive, because obviously they had to get around a lot of my academic blocks and things like that, and but they were exceedingly patient through the whole process, and were very gentle, just kept reminding me and again, and eventually I'd get it. And they give these lovely smiles when you get it and say, okay, great, you got that. Let's move to the next level, and but yes, that's the energy that I always perceive from the Pleiadians, or at least the groups that I connected with.
Did they say anything about any organization that they belong to or that is monitoring the Earth?
Yeah, it's interesting because on the times that they asked me to bilocate and go up with them, this is very interesting. There has only been one time I have ever been up there where it was just them by themselves. It was the Pleiadians, a group of Arcturians were usually with them, and I could perceive other races that were observing in the background. And I got this distinct impression that there were multidimensional beings that didn't have bodies that were there as well, and they were all observing and understanding. They all wanted to have a turn at saying something in the ways that they do, but they really wanted to see how I responded to being there, being around them, and how my energy changed. They were really wanted to focus on, okay, are you ready to handle what we're about to give you? Are you settled? Are you okay with this energy, or do you need to go back, basically? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, please continue.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, and throughout my experience of working with them, there has always been this perception there is a colossal, what would I call it? I know lots of people have talked about federations and confederations. I mean, I would say, in my experience, that's very real, although there was never any word mentioned of they never said, oh, we are from a federation or anything like that. But I definitely got the perception that they were intimately working together on very large-scale projects, and here and elsewhere. And there are a lot of other beings that were extragalactic too. Not just, and they didn't, they tried to give me their names once, but I couldn't for life of me pronounce it. It was, so I just said, okay, I can feel your energy. I'll just take, that's good enough. Yeah, and a lot of the beings that have contributed to the work have been beings that have come from, distant galaxies. They're not from here. Andromedans were also part in places of this work too. And yeah, it was never the same on any one occasion. The groups would slightly mix and change depending, I think, the kind of energy and information they wanted to give me. Because sometimes they would bring me up and they'd put me in a pod for healing, and they would specifically work on certain areas, and I'd be in there for maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then I would come out and they'd say, okay, would you like a tour of our ship? And of course I'd say, yeah, definitely. And it was very interesting. Again, while there, I was aware of being in a sphere-like presence, but still being able to hear, perceive, not as clear as I can with my physical vision, but it was still very, very clear.
Because we're talking about you projecting your consciousness into the ship, having the interaction, and they put you into a pod for healing. So how does that work? That like your consciousness is placed into a pod?
Yes.
And how does that physically heal you? Because I imagine your consciousness is in an ethereal form, and your physical body is back at home. So how does that heal the physical body?
Well, it's interesting. It's a very good question. What seemed to happen is that while I was there, I would appear and then I would be spherical in form. But as I go into the pod, it's as if the only way I can describe it is an energetic copy of my body would extend from that. And then the pod would close. And then what the impression I got, they never gave me too much detail, but while I was in there, just sort of feeling and experiencing this, the impression I got was they were putting energetic codes that I could carry back that would then map back into my physical body once I got there. And so they weren't, as I understand it, I mean, I could be wrong, but they weren't actively working on my physicality. They would just give me the packets of energetic changes that they would give me, and then I would go back, and then I'd have to integrate them, because after one of these experiences, in certain circles, people talk about stuff coming up, and after every one of these experiences, a whole bunch of stuff would shift and remove, because, and I suspect that was part of the deal, that they were helping in ways to shift stuff fast that would just take perhaps a lot longer to do if I was doing it, the usual style, if you like, so definitely.
Can you explain the difference between the Arcturians and the Pleiadians and also the Andromedans? I mean, what was the difference between those races, and how did they identify themselves to you, for you to know that, well, these are Pleiadians, these are Arcturians?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I don't recall ever them saying before that we are the Arcturians or we are the Pleiadians, except when I connected with them individually in the early days. And it's one of the things that I feel they've always been trying to teach me is understand who you are dealing with by their energy, their signature, and that's very important. And so in the early days, I got very used to the kind of core energy that Pleiadians would emit. And then when the Arcturians came in, when they were teaching me about the high dimensional science aspects, I got used to their energetics and their signature. And so when I would go on, I would immediately be able to tell, you guys are definitely Pleiadians, you guys are Arcturians. I don't know who you guys are. And then I could ask the question and they would introduce themselves as, we are, from the Andromedan galaxy, or if they were from another galaxy, they would say, well, we're from a galaxy that you don't know of. There is no name that we could give you, but they're all together in that. And so I took my time going on there just to pick the energies and feel who was there, basically. So it wasn't like a formal introduction where they would introduce themselves. They would just wait and see what I would do and how I would perceive them.
Okay, and the Elohim, I mean, how did they come into the picture?
Yeah, so with the Elohim, so after, I guess so I can go back and talk about some of the other bits that happened before them, but in New Zealand, and maybe just before we moved to New Zealand, some beings came in and said, at some point in the future, we're going to connect with you, but you still need a little bit more adjustment. you still need to stabilize some things in your energy field. And then we'd like you to work with us. And I got the feeling, I mean, it was, and again, with this group, it was a really high level, expansive field consciousness. They were not individuated. They didn't perceive to have bodies, anything like that. It was just a very elevated. And it reminds me a little bit of Peter Slattery. I know you've had him on your show before. And I have to say, a lot of his experience when he talked about with the Elohim matches a lot of what I've experienced as well. And so these beings, I could only perceive them as a vast intelligence of almost like a field energetic. And I never perceived them as in physical form. So we're in New Zealand, and I have a very close connection with my higher self. And my higher self said, okay, I'd like you to sit down in meditation now because we want you to connect with a group of beings. And I sat down. The meditation, it seemed like only 10 minutes, but my wife said I was there for like nearly 2 hours in this. So time just was completely different when I went to meet them first. And they took me to what I call the halls of the Elohim. And it wasn't a physical place, although I could discern a kind of certain dimensionality to it. It seemed to be oval in shape. It had these crystalline energetic pillars that were around the room. And they brought me into the center of the room. And, you know, this was bilocating again. And these beings put themselves around the outside of the room. And they didn't say anything. And I just sat there and waited. And then I could feel an energetic field come around me as they were doing some kind of work on me. And, you know, it felt incredibly peaceful. And I could feel they were doing some fine tuning, some upgrading, that kind of thing. And then they had introduced themselves as the Elohim. And, you know, and then they just gently took me out of that state and brought me back. And I honestly thought I was only gone for about 10 minutes, but it was nearly 2 hours, the whole experience. It was, I couldn't believe when my wife told me, are you sure? It really felt not that long, you know. And so they then came again another time and introduced and said, well, we would like to work with you because alongside your existing teams, because we have a lot of information and understanding we'd like to give you, and also awaken in you as well for the things that you're going to be doing down the road. So that was my connection with the Elohim and how it began. And they have been a fairly prominent part in, you know, what I've been doing since, I would say, and alongside the Arcturians and the Pleiadians. And at times, it was the Elohim that were very much at the forefront of everything that was coming through. And I find that a lot. Sometimes one group will come in more, another group will take a step back, and another group will come in. And it seems the way they organize themselves, certainly in my perception, is that if they have a particular layer of energetics they want to introduce, they will come forward. And if it's another layer from another group, they will come away and another group will come in, and they will layer it like this. And it's very much been an experience of layering of knowledge and energetics.
From what you've described, it sounds like you have a very nice balance in terms of having these interactions with these different entities, extraterrestrials, the Elohim, but also you communicate or you're in touch with your higher self.
Yes.
And so that way it's like, you know, they all interact with each other. Whereas I know with a lot of people, they don't have any connection with their higher self. It's like, you know, they're just up there and it's like, and they accept these things as gods. So you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very, very good point. And that's something I was hoping to touch on because I felt when I was communicating with them earlier today, they very much wanted to share that with your audience as well. And that is that the higher self of each individual is really the gateway. It's very important to know and get to know your higher self and to get to know the intelligence in the heart center, because that is the living core intelligence where, for me, the higher self seats itself, and where all of your perceptibility of truth and illusion and those beings that may be trying to give you false information compared to beings that are giving you absolutely accurate information. You can tell it straight away from there. And that has been something that they've always encouraged me, that the higher self is the key core of who you are. And, you know, I worked with my higher self with every dealing I have. I don't just wander off and just willy-nilly do whatever. My higher self is literally the center of everything that I do through everything I do. And I got the feeling that the ETs that I connect with were actually very happy. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I think they would kind of like people to, you know, work with their higher selves more, because in the process we're going through right now on Earth, it's very important that the foundational seat of our evolution is with our higher selves, and anchoring the higher self, adjusting the human body to be able to anchor the intelligence of the higher self, to be able to perceive and live as the higher self in a human body. And, you know, and I did notice in my travels in amongst, you know, the sort of spiritual community that, as you say, a lot of people weren't doing that. They were constantly connecting to other beings and forgetting their true selves, which I think is of vital, vital importance to remember when working in these ways, that the higher self really is the gatekeeper of you, in a way of saying, I know that sounds a little bit serious, but, you know, it's, but also your greatest protector as well. So, you know, that's a very important thing to know. And also, you know, it's very important to suggest that when people do contact ETs, to make sure that your higher self is okay with that contact, because your higher self has the 60,000-foot view. And even though those ETs might be very well-meaning, their energetics might be a little bit too different for you to integrate. And so your higher self might say to you, well, yeah, that would be a good idea, but you might need to take a bit of time to adjust and integrate first. You know, otherwise you can have a whole lot of stuff that will come up and go on, and it may not be so settling for you. So I would say, yeah, that's absolutely spot on. I would always recommend higher self, everything you do, definitely.
I know in the last interview I did with Elena Danan, and you mentioned that a little bit earlier, you know, we were talking a lot about the importance of discernment, because
yes,
you know, there are so many different groups out there, and you touched on that. And, you know,
yeah,
there's the good, there's the bad, and there's the indifferent. And so,
yeah,
you know, you need to tap into something within yourself, or
yes,
have a way of differentiating
yes,
all of those.
I 100% agree with that. And for me, the foolproof measure, or the, as my team calls it, the gold standard of any interaction, is if you are sufficiently connected with your core intelligence in the heart, you can discern everything. Your heart has a full picture of a whole snapshot of everything going on. Your mind can be fooled, but your heart cannot. That's always what I've learned with them, and they've constantly reminded me of that. And I think that's why when I do those bilocations, they don't say anything. They want me to sample their energy, have a feel. Who are we? And see if you can understand who we are and what our intentions are here. And that really is the bread and butter, I would say, of whenever I have these experiences, both with them and within Earth as well.
Now, you talk a bit about the infinite source love energy, intelligence.
Yes. Yes.
So
yeah.
How is the heart center the way to connect to that? I mean, some people might say, well, wouldn't you connect to it through your third eye or through the seventh chakra? Why the heart center?
Well, because exactly, in a way, for another reason as well, but particularly what I was just saying there, that the heart center is, for me, and what my teams have always been telling me, is that it is the gateway and your direct access. That you have something in your sacred heart. So you have your physical heart, there's the energetic heart, which is sometimes called your heart chakra. And then they've described to me something called the high, you know, sort of like the sacred heart, or the high heart. And that's a very powerful energy field. And at the center of that, what they've told me is there is an infinity point. That infinity point is your specific, personalized, direct connection with source. Nothing can get in the way. Nothing may enter that unless it is you. And that is a key thing, because in my experience, the protection mechanisms in a way, and the heart intelligence are formidable. Nothing gets in there unless it is the real you. And that's another key point in my experience, that's why it's so important. And I'd always encourage anybody who wants to have experiences or is working for their personal evolution, absolutely spend a lot of your time connecting with your heart center, getting to connect with that infinity point, because I've noticed that with doing that work, I have a perceptibility about just walking around on the street, you know, and when you hear people talk, you can immediately perceive all the undercurrents of what they're saying to you. And you can tell, you know, sometimes when it's genuine distortion, sometimes when they're just a little bit afraid of talking to you and they're not talking to you truthfully. You can really start to feel all those layers. And, you know, so you're not using your mind to talk to them and say, oh, does that make logical sense? Are they talking truth? Or you have to kind of just gently let that subside and then perceive them and talk to them as if you were connecting in your heart center, and then you can see a whole overview of who they are. So that's how I do it, and that's how I always, whenever a new being comes along, when I'm in meditation or something like that, I always connect to the heart center first. My higher self comes in, and that's the first immovable steps that will always be there, and then, you know, I check with my high self, and my high self lets me have a snapshot of their energy field. And then I can determine A, if they're okay, B, what their intentions are, and, you know, where they want to take this. And then if it's okay, I'll say, okay, we can have a conversation, you know. So that's how I do it.
That's fascinating that you distinguish, or you were told that there's a difference between the heart chakra and the heart center, which has this infinity point within it.
Yes.
And I know that's very similar to what George Cavassalis has been saying. He actually also points to this heart center that's beyond the chakra system. And in fact, he says the chakra system is in kind of like a control system. Like our body, our physical body is like an avatar suit developed by some extraterrestrials, and that's used to control us. And he says that the heart center is what connects us to the infinite.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think in my experience, I would say that the high heart, or the sacred heart, is beyond duality. It's not susceptible to all the interference mechanisms that, you know, go on in this world. And what they've always made clear to me is, when you spend time practicing, just even once a day, you know, ask your higher self to come in and help you bridge to that sacred heart, the infinity point. Build that relationship with your source self. You'll begin to change. Your perceptibility will begin to change. You will then learn to disseminate between the dualistic energies that come at you, that you might think on one day are okay, but when you sit in that energy, you will be able to pick them apart, and you'll see, no, I don't want that. That one is okay. And it just changes your ability to energetically discern, not discern the information or pick apart the words that are being said. Understand the snapshot of the energy, and is that energy good for you? Are their intentions good? What do they want to do? You get a whole, it's almost like a quantum snapshot is a little bit like having all possible layers of that being, all pictures that they could put layered in one, and squished together, and you get an instantaneous snapshot. And you sit with it, and you just pick it apart and feel around it, and then you can discern from that area, okay, I can get a really good vision of who you are now, and I understand where you're coming from. So that is how I operate with it. And they've been teaching me that from for a very long time, even though in the beginning I didn't realize that was what they were teaching me, but I understand it now. That's what they were doing. Yeah.
So that I think is worth pursuing, how the higher self directs you to make connection with this higher heart, or the sacred heart, as you described it. And what comes to mind to me is almost like in Hawaii, they have the idea of ho'oponopono, where if you, for example, have a grievance against someone, that the way to heal that, I mean, in short, it's like making that connection to the heart center, which is all about forgiveness, that you have actually drawn that person into your life to
Yes.
do something unjust to you, or that you might perceive, well, I'm a victim, they did this to me. But from the heart, for making that heart center connection, it's like you drew them into your lives so that you could have that interaction, so you could learn. So you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I've had many examples of that happening to me as well. That's no easy task at a lot of times, you know. And yeah, in the beginning, I had my fair share of getting really, really upset with people coming into my presence and doing, you know, weird things. And it's always true. And my teams were, again, always so patient and so humble about how. And, you know, if I got in a bit of a tiz, you know, they would back off and just let me go through my process. And then they would come back in when I settle down. And they would say, so do you understand what happened there? And they've always said that, understand that from the heart intelligence level, everything, of course, is in unity. And what's happened is that for humanity and a number of other races, because we have mind and because we have, you know, varying degrees of free will, you know, different planets, and there's different experiments going on. It's a little bit like they give me the analogy like humanity's put a virtual reality helmet on, and that's part of the systems that we're operating in right now. And they're saying what happens is, I know if anybody you have or your audience has ever seen those funny YouTube videos where somebody puts a virtual reality helmet on and is absolutely convinced they are in this game and starts flapping around and behaving as if they're in that game, and they don't realize that they're not. And it's very similar for me that the holographic physical duality perception of reality that we are in is very similar to that we have a mind-based perceiving device as part of our human experience that we are in. And we come here as an element of source through the sacred heart, down through the different levels, through the heart energy center, through the heart, and in the different chakras, and all the other energy systems that make up our physical body and the other layers of our energetic body. And the trouble is, from birth, we are taught to absolutely identify and fit ourselves into all the elements of this kind of virtual reality, if you like, this simulation, if you like, this holographic play. And so, and I believe that's essential to what's happening in the awakening. You know, a lot of people talk about the Great Awakening and all the different versions and ideas that is. Well, what that means to me, people are learning to remember themselves as their heart intelligence truth, and learning to understand and operate in a vehicle like a human body with a mind that can perceive and interact with this holographic reality, but never forgetting who you really are, so that you can have your experiences, you can play, but you always understand that the great architect within you, the creator, is you through your heart, through your sacred heart center. And you can have this ability to create these beautiful, masterful, amazing experiences within the hologram that reacts to you, and it completely adapts to your energetic signature. That once you understand that, and you understand how to change the energetics within you to match what you would like to have, that is when I believe that real mastery begins, because you're no longer swayed, pulled, divided by all these outside things trying to pick at you, because you understand who you are in your heart intelligence. That is absolutely beyond all the duality and all of the mechanisms that, you know, impinge on us. And if you can, then you have this overlay of this suit and this mind of interactivity and perceptibility, so that you can do that like the masters have done in the past, you know, and they were all incredibly adept. They were fully connected, I believe, with their sacred intelligence from their heart, but they could operate in a human vessel with that understanding, with that remembrance, and with that beingness, and, you know, could see everything about everybody. And they had a gentleness about them because they could see everything. They had full understanding of the difficulties people were facing, the paths that people were walking, the mix of everything overlaid together. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does. And what you have been doing over the last 10, 20 years is developing some principles where this kind of heart center, this higher heart, and the infinity point in that, and establishing a communication or contact within that, that understanding the principles somehow aligns with some of these technologies that you've been developing. I know Infyneregy. So you want to explain what is Infyneregy and how that connects to what you've just been saying?
Sure, yes. Well, the word ISEE or the acronym you have there came to me. We were still in the UK at the time, and my Arcturian teams were helping me develop a type of geometrical coil system, which I will just call a C coil for the moment. And as always, they would say, "Okay, we're going to give you a flash shot of what we want you to build." And I go, "Oh, great, excellent!" You know, my kind of like kitty wanting to know everything and unwrap all the presents, in one go. And they said, "No, settle your mind down again." And they said, "We want you to build this. We're not going to tell you anything about it. We want you to build it, turn it on, and feel. We want you to feel the energetics. We want you to play with it. We want you to get to know what this is." So I built this device, and it would generate this amazingly harmonic, very soft energy, very powerful energy. And after a bit of playing with that, I started to get these intuitive impulses of what was actually happening. And they came in and they said, "Well, essentially what you are doing is you're building a mechanism to bridge, which is where the infinity comes from. So you're bridging to higher aspects that are beyond dualistic principles. And that level of living intelligent energy then gets bridged down and anchored here, which is the synergy aspect. So you are synergizing between high dimensional living energetics, which is where the heart intelligence dwells as well. And you are synergizing that down here, and then you are creating in this space an energy which is formed from that bridge, the energetics that come through. So that is the ISEE part. And the last part, which is the evolution, is that I found that, and the first time I ever experienced this was with John Bedini in his labs, this energy that gets developed is a living, intelligent energy, and you can interact with it, you can communicate with it, and you can literally ask it to do things. It's not like a generic field that you might create and it's just sitting there and you can turn it on and off and you can move through it, that kind of thing. It has very peculiar conscious traits where it reacts to you. It will even play with you, if that's a phrase to say. But the net thing that I found is the evolution that I was getting, the high level energetics and conscious energetics that were coming through. My body started getting much lighter. My intuitive abilities really started to shoot up. The clarity of what I was getting in dream time really raised up significantly. It went from a sort of foggy haze of, a mishmash of all sorts of things, to very hyper clear, experiences and visuals, during dream time. And so, yeah, the IC logo just really encapsulated to me exactly the principle of what's happening. And I feel all the way along in their teaching of me and helping me to remember, was very much trying to understand and build devices that would operate on this principle of anchoring and bridging to high dimension. I think I sent you an animation that I don't know if you have it there that might be helpful for your audience to see. Because there are so many different layers, field layers to reality. And even though I sort of depict them as being one on top of the other, they're not like that at all. They're all around you. It's an overlay. And the best way to understand it is, like one of those really old radios that you turn up and down. I might be showing my age a bit, but, I'm not sure how many people remember those old radios that you tune up and down, analog. But as you move the dial up and down, you're essentially attuning the perceptive condition of the radio to only tune into that particular reality where the DJ is speaking on that. And even though all the other voices and all the other frequency bands are carrying on, overlaid, you can't hear them because you haven't tuned in or zoned in to resonate with that particular thing. And so they taught me a lot about how to make this bridge and how to allow this high dimensional energy to come through, and also how to lens it in particular ways to apply it with different applications as well. And so there's lots and lots of things that they've been helping me to do. And a lot of applications are still on the design board right now and still being worked out, which they give me the go-ahead when they're ready for me to actually make it and actually put it into form. But these devices, the Infyneregy devices, the QSE, which is the Quantum Stillpoint Clarifier, and the Quantum Earthseeds, this is the first wave of the devices that they've asked me to build. So does that answer your question? Do you have any? So that was a bit of a mouthful of.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Unpack it in a way that makes sense.
Sure.
That helps the audience understand the evolution of this. You mentioned John Bedini. So can you just explain what John Bedini was doing and how that relates to this idea of advanced living intelligent fields?
Yeah, well, it's by the time, so I had this relationship, a friendship with Tom, and we'd collaborated and worked together. And I'll just explain the build up to how I met John, and then I'll go into the question that you have, just to set the tone for your audience. And so Tom, after I finished my PhD, I was invited to take part in this documentary that they were doing called Energy from the Vacuum. And so I came over and I got to meet Tom, and lovely guy. And he said, "Oh, what are you intending to do now that you finished your PhD?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I don't think I feel academia is my path." And he said, "Well, we're working with a team in Scotland on a device that Tom had called the MEG, which is the Motionless Electromagnetic Generator." And he said, "Why don't I see if I can set you up there?" Which did happen, and I was delighted with that. During that time, they wanted me back again to do some science editing because they didn't know how to pick some of the segments together and put them in a way that was coherent. So they said, "Would you mind coming over and helping us do the editing?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And he said, "Well, while you're here, we want you to meet John Bedini." And I said, "Oh, great. I'd love to meet John as well," because I'd heard of him before. And both Tom and John are kind of, I consider, unfortunately both have passed away now, but to me, they're really super people, titans in their field. They've been massively helpful and very open with all of their work. They've published their circuits in books, and you can find those still. They're really nice people. So I got to meet John, and because of his experiences, he was in the U.S. Air Force early on, and he'd had a lot of things that had happened to him. So he was a bit skeptical of me coming, like, "Who is this new guy? I don't know you," kind of thing. And I was like this kid in a candy store with everything that John had in his workshop. And he took me into this room where he had a device running. And the picture you've got up, it was a device very similar to the one you have there. The one in the bottom right-hand corner is one of his big devices. It was a bit of a smaller one that he had running. Now, this part of his workshop was like a wooden wall within an industrial unit. There was no doors. The door is like a double door, but there were no doors on there, so it's fully open. As soon as I walked in through the door, the energetic completely changed. And it wasn't like it was, like a Faraday cage, which is commonly used as a cage mechanism to keep out electric or magnetic fields. It wasn't like this. It's like the energy just decided to stop at the door. And you could literally, I sat there and I put my hand through the door and then pull out, and you could feel the energy right in there, and you pull it out. And it was almost like this, I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It was like this energy field fog that would not come out of this open door space. But as soon as you walked in, it was right there, and everything I could. And at that time, I was very connected with my higher self, working with the guides. And so my perceptibility of these energy fields was quite increased. And I really could feel just how enlivening and in lifting this energy field was that was being produced by these machines. And so I said to John, I said, "Wow, the environment here is really quite something. And, John was quite a funny guy. He used to swear like a trooper, but he had a fantastic sense of humor. He was always larking around. And he was very curious about what I was picking up. And we did this whole thing with him. And John and Tom were very close friends. They collaborated. They'd done documentaries together on both of their work. And John had built immense numbers of machines. He'd replicated everything he could find on Nikola Tesla. And it was fascinating how, he began on this. He said, and this will definitely be of interest to you in your historical aspects, but I said to John once, I said, how did you get into this? How did you start with this? And he said, and coincidentally enough, he was stationed at a place called RAF, it's now RAF Bruggen. It used to be US Air Force Base in Germany. And weirdly enough, when I was in the Air Cadets, because I wanted to be a pilot when I was younger, I was posted there for a week during an annual camp to get to learn how the Air Force works and everything. And it's the only time I ever went to one. And it happened to be the same base that John Bedini was posted at. Not at the same time, but, I said, oh, fancy that. That's kind of as interesting. And he said he was ordered to decommission some old World War II aircraft sitting underneath the hangars. And so he and his fellow US Air Force people were just larking around, and they thought, well, they get into a cockpit, switch it on, and they didn't expect anything to happen, but it came on fully powered. Now, bear in mind how much time they'd been sitting down there. This should never have happened. And so he said he got down, they were looking around this aircraft to find out how on earth this thing was powered. And they found this little unit in there, which later on, he said, after he fished around, was what he believed was a version of Nikola Tesla's device called a shuttling currents, where you just keep on turning this dial and it just comes up fully charged every time. And so that's how his interest in this peaked. And from then he would build, he would design stuff, he would work with Tom. And so me and John had a good friendship, and we collaborated as well while I was at a university in Scotland following my PhD, and once I finished there. And my job there was to take Tom's device, the motionless electromagnetic generator, which I think I sent you a picture of as well. And they wanted me to try to crank out the mathematical modeling to understand how this was actually functioning. And this is basically a normal transformer with like an glass iron core in the middle. There was a magnet that was in the middle with secondary and primary rings. And he would pulse the input of this transformer, and he would get out more, that he was putting in. So our job was to try to understand theoretically how that was happening. But after a while, I had to leave there. My team came in and said, okay, so you've done enough, more than what you could do here, and now it's going to come to an end. So I moved away, but I kept in touch with Tom and John. But the energetic that I first felt when I went into John Bedini's lab that time really sat with me. And my team was smiling and said, we would like you to we would like you to take a path which is to do with living energetics and develop different devices to generate these living energetics. And so literally that's how I pretty much am where I am today with this, and all of the devices that I built. And I built models and replicas of John Bedini's machines, which I think are also sent you of. And one of the key things, which I think is really significant when we talked about the human body, the heart center, and heart intelligence, is that in all of John's devices, and there are a bunch of other devices that other inventors had made, which I had, the honor of having a look at too. Not all of them, but some of them. They used a type of winding in their coils, which is wound like DNA helix. Which I didn't quite fully get the connection in the beginning, but as I learned from my teams, the energetic conditions that are created when you spin high energy around in that way. And it reminds me a little bit of the caduceus, the Egyptian caduceus. Whenever I look at that, what I see is a symbolism where high energy is moving, which is depicted by those serpents. And what you get in the center is this new energy that emerges right from the middle, which I call the center point energy. Some other people have used different names for it. I believe some people use 0 point and all sorts of other things. But essentially, it is, in my experience, the language of the universe of generative energetics, spiral or counter-rotating fields, whether it's in coil form or whether it's in your DNA. And I know that way back there was a team of Russian scientists that were messing around with sending light through DNA. And they found that the light would coil through the DNA and it would stay in there for a long period of time. And they had some amazing examples of how this is working. So I don't think it's any coincidence that human DNA is designed the way it is, because I believe from what I've learned and what they've taught me and my experience has been, when you have energies moving through that kind of geometrical counter-rotation, that vortexing, something very special indeed happens in the middle. So yeah, that's, I hope that kind of answers your question in a long roundabout way, but
yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, what you just said about living energetics, and you did send me one picture, Jazz, if you can put up the living energetics picture and the counter-rotating vortex, because, I mean, you have electromagnetic waves being generated all the time, you know, by currents flowing through various devices. And of course, you know, like the telephone, it's generating an EMF field. And of course, if you get too close, it'll make you sick. But with this living energetics, you mentioned this vortex. And what comes to mind is, I mean, you were talking about the heart center and the infinity point. So when you generate electromagnetic energies using the vortex, is the vortex something that is kind of like a fractal or connected to the kind of like infinity point? Is that why it becomes like a living energy that protects and sustains as opposed to depletes and hurts?
Yes, that is pretty much spot on, I would say. So the thing about and I would say this is probably a big reason why you hear in the past, like, masters used to live for a very long time, you know, and these ET beings have these almost undefined lengths of their lifespan. You see, in modern physics, we are taught to see energy as a dead structure, essentially. You know, it can be kinetic or moving, or it can be potential in nature, but that's pretty much all you get. You know, molecules, atoms, large-scale structures, these are basically just Lego building blocks, essentially. And what you put in, you can at best get that same out, and that's it. That you can only break even, as the coin goes in mainstream physics. In my view, there is an entire world of different science of energetics that is missing from that. Now, with living energetics, as you put the slide up there, this is self-aware energy that is biased because it comes from the creator source, and it is biased to generate, create, evolve, and expand in ways that are expansive to the whole universe, not destructive. Okay. And so when you bring these energetics in, they will automatically start rejuvenating and regenerating. And some of the pictures you might show later on of where somebody, you know, people have taken the devices that the team and I have created near fruit or flowers, those kind of things, and you can see just how long they last by sitting next to them compared to when they're not. And that literally is down to the fact that living energetics want to go in there and they want to create a life-biased direction for the structure, the atoms, the molecules, the macroscopic organism, you know, to make them sustain and move forward. And if you have a diminished level of access, which I believe is what's happened to humanity, because, and that's another reason why it's so important to connect to the infinity point, because you are rebridging and rebuilding your own specific connection with that purely generative, life-biased, energetic consciousness. And here you see, now this is an interesting point. This is a picture you put up here, which kind of typifies something quite extraordinary. Now, in typical literature, the heart center is depicted as green. The heart chakra is green. Now, if you arc electricity or you see lightning in this atmosphere, it's typically blue. You know, it's that famous blue lightning arc kind of color. When on film, we got John to store a bunch of this energy into a capacitor, let it store up, and then arc it and discharge it rapidly. And then we played back the video frame by frame, and at the moment where it flashes like this, it's a luminescent green, and it behaves very differently. And yeah, if you could keep that slide up on the photon, I want to move into that because it all helps to make a much better picture and understanding. Now, this is the interesting thing. You see, the physics that we're used to, the type of energy that engineers use day in and day out, they use a type of energy which is called entropic energy. It basically creates entropy, heating up, distortion, breaking down. It melts things. You know, if you arc it, it literally wants to dissipate itself. You know, so if you take a battery and you put a load on it like a light bulb or something, you connect them up, it's going to run, but it's just going to dissipate and just, you know, it's just going to flatten itself out. It wants to dissipate. It's not a generative form of energy. It's a dissipating form of energy. With John's devices here, what he found is the more load you put on the backside of this, the more batteries you plant on the backside, the better it works. In other words, you put a battery on the front end, you have this device, you put a bunch of batteries on the back end, and the more you put up, the better it charges the back end batteries. It works in the opposite of what we're used to. And I find that fascinating because as a physicist, we were always taught about how energy is always just trying to dissipate. You can pump a load of energy in, it's just going to dissipate. You might do what you want to do for a little while, but you've got to keep paying, you've got to keep paying it in, and you've got to keep, you know, putting it in. But to me, you know, I find it funny that when people talk about, oh, this is perpetual motion, I say, well, the universe is one giant perpetual motion machine. You know, you're living in one, you know, and, you know, so the science behind how things really work in my mind, when you look at living energetics and life-biased energetics, which are living energetics, is totally different from anything we've normally experienced in the everyday world. That's why it seems so counter, you know, logical, if you like, that you know, people have been trained to think of. And some inventors say that when they had these devices and they arced it out, when there was so much of this energy going through, instead of heating up and melting the wires froze. Ice formed on the wires. Again, so instead of expanding and destroying, they were crystallizing and freezing up, which is absolutely the opposite of everything that we know and love in this world of ours that we've been used to. And so, but the story doesn't, yeah, thanks for putting that slide up. So this is the coil that you see there is my second generation model of my replication of one of John Bedini's machines. I didn't build it as an energy generator to charge batteries, this one. I was fascinated by the energy that it was producing. So I wanted to investigate that aspect. And as you can see, if you look closely on the coil, it's wound like a helix DNA, but around the main coil. And it's funny because when you turn this device on, I got exactly the same as what happened in John Bedini's lab. Whatever room you put it in, it would stay within the room. It wouldn't move out. You could open the door and leave it open. It wouldn't go out. And you could walk in and out of the door. And when you're out, you could feel the whole environment drop down, go very heavy again. You walk in the room and it just raises up. It was fascinating to work with this. And so my teams, they said, okay, this is the beginnings of, you know, your initial teachings of, you know, what we want you to investigate and look into. So, and this device, I didn't have a full picture, but basically it was a a wheel with magnets all the way around the edge. I had them south-facing, and it would go over that coil, and it would just speed up and continuously going. And the energy that it would produce would be this, what Nikola Tesla called radiant energy. So Nikola Tesla was actually, I believe, the first person who coined that phrase and worked with this energy. And I believe he noted some of its extraordinary properties too. And it behaved very differently from ordinary energy. And so, you know, when I'd sit down, I would go into meditative state, and I would, you know, the energy actually is a living energy. And this sounds very funny for a mainstream physicist to say this, but it has a consciousness, and it will interact with you. And so I really began to, and I had to shift so much of the dogmas and everything else that I had learned to put in there from my previous time. And it was very hard because I'd learned for years to be trained to see energy in a particular way and never ever look at it or think of it like this at all. And so it was a very difficult time for me to unload and unlearn all that stuff. And then my teams would come in and help me understand things very differently. But what I found is that it just, even 10 minutes next to one of these devices, you'd walk outside and you'd feel really regenerated and rejuvenated, you know, as if all the tiredness just vanished and you felt full of energy, as if it had just recharged you. It was extraordinary to experience.
The device that emanates that living intelligent field, and there is a diagram that I have there. If you can put that up, Jazz. But so you're saying that the energy field that's generated by that device using a kind of double vortex in the generation of that field, that is intelligence. That is something that you walk into that field, and it's an intelligence. And so, I mean, you can communicate with it or interact with it. Yes,
and so with that, this series of devices, just before I answer your question, they taught me how to essentially, capture's the wrong word, but gain that bridging system into an element that would go in there. So there aren't any coils in that system. So essentially it's a natural material, it's a crystalline material, but it's been developed in such a way that it captures that bridging system with another device we have here, which is quite big. It's about the size of a room. And we're able to, they showed me how that you can create that multidimensional bridging system into an element, and it would go in there, and the living energetics would emanate and expand outwards from there. So that's just to clarify that one, and to give you some experiences with this. And these devices, you know, the teams update a lot, and they do it as the Earth and humanity is ready to receive them. So when big shifts happen, or, you know, people make big strides, or, you know, collectively they make big strides, they bring in another update to shift it up another level. And we made one for the food system, and I'll give an example with the Serenity in just a second. And we were just putting it next to plates to completely rejuvenate what we were eating. And we sat down, and the energy of the field of the device said, I can actually do all plates simultaneously. And I said, okay, go ahead. And literally the overlay of my vision, I could see these energetic conduits form out of the center of the device to everybody's plate, and everything got done at the same time. So it was a real step up in just how aware I realized the energy that comes from these devices is. And another time, they just done another upgrade to the field energetics of the device. In other words, they opened the bridge up a little bit more and allowed more conscious living energetic to come through. And they showed us an image of the field leaving the house, but what we saw is they were showing us going around the next door neighbor's house. It didn't go through. And I said, that's interesting. Why did that happen? And they said, because your next door neighbors are not ready to have this energy go through them. It would bring up far too much stuff for them. They're not ready. They don't have the tools to work through, you know, the changes that are going to happen, and it would cause more, you know, and it would unbalance them. So it went around. And we find that a lot, you know, that the way it was said to me by my teams is that the intelligent energy will work directly with the higher self, with the person who's there, and it will regulate itself as to how much energy, what caliber of energy each person has, and the rate at which they get it. And so it's a fully interactive device that works with the higher selves of each individual. And we've seen many examples of how that works, and especially with us as well. And so I believe what the teams are trying to do is they're trying to introduce people to the concept of a brand new technology. And there could be other people around the world doing this. I don't know. But it's a new way of existing in the world where you can consciously direct energies instead of picking them up and physically moving them around, doing operations with them electronically. And that's the other thing. Whenever I've been on their ships, I never, ever saw anything that resembled anything like an electronic circuit, a conventional energy system of any kind. It was all consciousness. They would interact with the consciousness of their ships. It was a living symbiosis. And that's how they operate. All the advanced civilizations seem to have this,
Can I just throw something in there?
Sure.
Because it is very important. There's another well-known or very popular channeler who says that she went up onto one of the ships, and she says that she was told that the craft of these ships generate these electromagnetic fields, a lot of radiation, and that that they actually have to develop advanced healing modalities, and they have to adapt to dealing with that kind of like with that energy, that radiation. Now, would that be something that, say, a inferior, or let's just say a less developed or less attuned civilization does, that their technologies generate these EMFs or the radiation, where when contactees come in proximity, they get sick, whereas opposed to the ones that you're working with, it's the opposite effect? You want to elaborate?
Yeah, certainly. That's a very, very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I would agree with what you just said there. I have never had the experience of going up onto ships that were more mechanistic and a little bit more to what you just described there. The ships that I've been on, like I said, there was no inkling at all of any conventional electronic device of that kind, of any nature. It was very, very, very advanced conscious technology, to coin a phrase. The environment in those ships was incredibly gentle, peaceful, and your heart just opens naturally when you're on there. It did for me anyway. It's just an environment where these beings are emanating this generative love energetic, which to me is the intelligence of source. Love and source intelligence are exactly the same thing to me. But I am aware of when I have worked with the Inner Earth people, for example, they were giving me some examples of some of the technology they have had in the past, which were slightly to do with using very high electromagnetic fields, those kind of things. And particularly when humans mess around with those kind of fields, then yes, you can get high energy gamma rays, X-rays produced, and they're very dangerous for people to experience, and you do have to have shielding for those. But like I said, I've never gone aboard any ship that wasn't using these advanced conscious energetics, and the ship itself was intelligent. And in one experience, they took me to interface with the ship itself, and the ship was talking to me just like they would. It was living, conscious, intelligent ship, and it was very receptive. And the energy I would describe as, it was incredibly focused, but also very expansive, and it was very receptive to my questions. And so I would say that from hearing other people's experiences and meshing that with my own, I would definitely say that what I would qualify as the heart-centered evolved races don't use that kind of technology as far as I'm aware. I've never had any experience of them using that kind of thing. And like I said, the environments in their ships are highly, highly generative. You know, there is this real perceivable symbiosis going on between them and the ships that they're in. There's nothing degenerative or degrading about it at all. And it's nurturing, very nurturing.
To look at a episode of Iconic that was where they tested the Serenity device, and just the backstory is, of course, that, well, actually, maybe you should say what the backstory is for how
Sure.
the Serenity device is at the Iconic office. But let's play the first 25 seconds, Jazz, of that video, and then we'll let David kind of give us a breakdown of what happened.
Over the last 2 years, many have asked whether 5G technology could be linked to the pandemic. Many have questioned whether so-called virus symptoms are actually reactions to growing numbers of 5G masks going up and the amount of smart tech that's now in our offices and our homes. Here at Iconic, we had the opportunity to find out firsthand when staff fell ill after a 5G tower went up right outside our building. Gemma Cooper reports.
So essentially I should start by describing the three principles of what the ISEE is before very quickly, so the audience has a nice frame of reference for what I'm about to say. So the first principle of the home system is to do with changing degenerative coding. Now, I think I sent you an animation with a normal electromagnetic wave and another series of waves with a lot of particles of coding in them. I don't know if you have them accessible right now, just to help the audience visualize what I'm about to tell them. In the conventional view, electromagnetic waves are quite simply electric and magnetic oscillations coupled together. And a photon, which is an individuated form of that field that, you know, is a particularized form of that field, has very simplistic attributes, which is just the electric and magnetic oscillation. It has a spin aspect to it, and an energy. And that's basically it. That's how mainstream physics sees, you know, light in a kind of nutshell. The way that my teams have described photons or individualized aspects of electromagnetic fields is that photons are like living libraries. They have nested fields around them that contain a plethora of coded information, experiential coded information. And so when, for example, people talking about like when a flare goes off and you get all these, you know, photons radiating and everybody starts getting all their stuff churned up, that kind of thing. In my view, and certainly what my teams have been telling me, is that what's happening is those photons are loaded with high energetic codings and upgrades that when the photon hits you and interacts with you, it unloads that library of information, upgrades, all that generative stuff, and you absorb it. And when the photon leaves you, you leave your imprint in that photon as well. It carries away a signature of you as well. And so there is so much more to the anatomy, if you like, of these fields than, you know, I ever got taught or had an experience in my mainstream days. So what my teams were telling me was that inside these fields that get broadcasted, usually in the world, there's two types of, shall we say, coded information packets, or what I represent are these tiny little dots that hang around in the fields that kind of you can absorb and you can also impart to the field or the photon as well. Now, when you gain these, if they're degenerative in nature, they will obviously cause, you know, an energetic function which is degenerative. When you gain these and they're generative, it will uplift you. I mean, everybody, you know, apart from being, you know, they spend too long in the sun and getting burnt, will know that if you spend time in the sun, it's really generative, you know, because it's enriched with these generative, life-biased, living energetic codes. And in a way, the way that I got the feeling from my teams is they're like packets of intent. You know, when we talk about making intent and, you know, doing energy work with our minds and hearts and those sort of things, these packets are like tiny, tiny packets of intent They have active functions and they act like codes. And so in these devices, they encapsulated the ability of the living intelligent field to rewrite the degenerative coding that it finds in any fields around you from, sources, into purely generative. And so when people have these on, they find the environment lifts up, the environment becomes incredibly soft. It suddenly, and we noticed a real raise in our intuitive abilities, our ability to sense energy. It's almost like a pressure was relieved. It's like somebody took the atmospheric it wasn't obviously atmospheric pressure, but it's like an energetic pressure just got released. And whenever we put these into people's places, we notice the same things. The more degenerative energetics, oh, we got a bit of a thunderstorm. The more degenerative energetics that are present in all the stuff they have in their office or their whatever, as soon as we put this in, the whole environment just lifts off. And then suddenly it becomes really light. It's like the air, to one person's description of it, it just becomes living and fluffy. I know that sounds like a strange term to use, but there's no real way to explain it other than just it becomes incredibly generative and enriched with generative coding. And I believe that's the environment that I find up on those ships. And it's a lot more advanced up on those ships, because I don't think they could introduce anything as powerful as that down here. I don't think anybody... And I think that's part of the reason why they have me bilocate, because I think if my physical body went up there, I don't think my physical body would, there'd be so much stuff coming out of me. I'd have a heck of a time trying to deal with it all. But generative coding, when it goes into you, it will literally start to lift out any energetics within you that are stuck in there, that are stagnant, which are of a degenerative ilk. Let's put it that way. And so that's the first principle. The second principle of it is to introduce a reconnection to the Earth's grounding fields. And so that's another important thing, that we have a symbiosis with the living consciousness of the Earth. And so most of the time that gets lost. People are in high-rise buildings, that kind of thing. And so it gets really diminished. So that second aspect is the living consciousness of the field, reintroducing and helping people to rebridge, no matter where they are. And the third aspect is because of the influx of the living energetics that comes through the bridge in the device, it starts to lift people up and it starts to accelerate their expansion exactly in the way. And they were very clear on this. They said no one is going to be moved faster than their higher self wishes them to go. So some people find it goes slowly. Some people find they put it on and the next day everything is just rushed forward really quickly. And it totally depends on who you are and how fast your higher self goes, because that is my ethos is an absolute respect for the higher self's wishes of everything that goes. And they've been very clear with me from the beginning. This is how it is supposed to be. There is to be no violation of any kind on any level of the higher self's path through this. And I 100% agree with that. So coming back, sorry, I just wanted to kind of build a little picture of the device and its principles so that people aren't kind of lost when I explain the next bit. So a friend of mine in the UK knows the son, I believe, of David Icke, if I have that correct, Gareth Icke. And Gareth contacted him and said, they've just put this tower upside our office building. They're all getting completely hammered and they're all... I think he said they're developing flu-like symptoms, nosebleeds, headache, all sorts of things that he said that they were getting, if I'm accurate on that. And he said, what have you got? Because we're really in a lot of trouble right now. And he said, well, I know this guy that's got this device. You could try it. I've never experienced it myself, but, have a look and see what you think. So I sent them one, and they reported these massive changes. And after a few days, it was helping them from their own words and what I know of myself, clearing out a lot of the old energetics and starting to raise up and clear out the degenerative energetics that were coming into their office. And, people were saying anywhere to 1 to 3 days, everything was totally fine again. And so, yeah, and we've had many stories of people who have been absolutely inundated. One lady who was living out on her balcony because the energetics inside her apartment was so bad from the neighbors of what they had going on there. That was where she had to live. She couldn't go into a shop with gadgets and things like that. It would affect her too badly. And she had the device for about a year, and she reported back to us that she's now living happily. She can go into these shops. It doesn't affect her anymore, and it's all completely on the right track. And that tallies with exactly what the teams were telling us was likely to happen with a lot of people when they used this.
If you put up the other device, Jazz, the first one, the Serenity device, I just wanted to, because that was described, that was what was installed in that office.
Yes, that's correct.
Iconic. And so how big of a living energy field does that create? I mean, an office is a big area. So, I mean, how big?
Yeah.
How does that work?
So what it does is, and I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of how they help me understand how it operates. So I built the prototype, and it was literally a very DIY. I didn't have any materials, no machining capability, and they said, doesn't matter, go down to the art store, get these materials, make this shape to the dimensions that we give you, put the element inside, and you're good to go. So it was this, I think it was artboard that I used, which is that foam-like material that you can cut and do things, and made this shape and made this thing. And I thought, okay, now what do I do with it? You know? And they said, we want you to place it near the cable of an instrument that is now on. I said, okay, and I put it next to it. And instantaneously, this living field just grew throughout the entire wiring system of the house. And then within seconds had developed this fully stable field in the house, and the entire environment changed. And they were saying it's designed to use or piggyback on the electrical system of a house or an office, and it just expands very quickly throughout the entire environment using the house electrical system. To this day, we haven't actually measured there's any limit on how far the expansion goes within a house. We've tried it on office buildings. We've tried it on very big houses. It doesn't seem to matter. And I think that's another key thing with living energetics. It doesn't diminish in the same way that normal energetics do, you know, because, you put a battery on something, you send it down a mile of wires and you'll get a massive drop and you'll get very little out the outside. But with these kind of energetics, it works. The physics of it is so very different. It's totally different. So that's, I have no answer for you on that, because we actually haven't detected any limit yet on how big it will get.
So I do know, I mean, I did watch that video of the iconic office, and yeah, people talked about how it really did help them.
Yes.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people that are watching this that want to know, well, can we get one of these devices and where do we go?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And, I mean, the way I look at this is, working with the Heart Center, you really get a sense of the service that you are providing in terms of the energetics. And for me, I feel a very big calling to do what I do to help this planet and to help people evolve. It's really one of the main driving forces in doing what I do. And it's the same ethos of the guides and the teams I work with. They are so focused on helping people overcome these limitations they have. And the Infyneregy devices, like that's one of 5 of them. So we have them for the home, water, food, for your car, and for your devices as well, your gadgets. They wanted that particular number because they said humanity really needs the options of having living energetics to come in and support in a way that frees them from the how could I say, the barrage is probably a better way than any other to describe it, that people are going through, because people are working very hard to develop themselves and develop their consciousness, and it's not helped by all of the stuff that they have to contend with on top of that as well. And so these devices were really designed by them. I didn't know what type of devices they wanted to offer, and they were very clear, we want one for this and this and this and this. And so really it's at their instigation that these devices have come about. And, and I'm just over the moon about how they have helped people and how they've transformed people. People who thought they had no hope at all and had tried loads of different things and nothing had worked. And, this has really helped them and now they are living properly. They're expanding and evolving as they want to, which is fantastic. It just is wonderful for me to be able to do that. But yes, I mean, having the physics background and also the energetic background with the teams I work with, I think was very necessary. And I feel like this has been the plan in my life all along, even though I had no idea that was the plan from the beginning, as most people will understand that one too. But there's so much more that's coming as well. I mean, I could go on for, I don't want to go on for hours, but there's so much more that I'm sure that when they give me the go ahead to do, I'll be happy to share with you and, and see where you want to go with that as well. So,
well, I definitely would love to have you back and get you to talk about some of the other devices like the quantum still point clarifier that we kind of briefly showed there. But, we are out of time. So
yeah, sure.
So I guess people can just visit your website, infinitesourcecreations.com, and can they order the Serenity device?
Yeah, so there's two websites. We have that one, which is infinitesourcecreations.com. You can get the quantum still point clarifier and the quantum earth seeds, which is for the body of the earth for planting. And there's another site where you get the other devices, Serenity, which is ISEE horizontal hyphen and then Infyneregy.com. I don't know if you have that in front of you, but that's the other one that we have. And also, in addition to that, we have free meditations and activations that the Elohim and Infinite Source have brought through to help people bridge that Infinite Source creative bridge within themselves as well. Because the two, they were very clear that in bringing through these devices, it was necessary to offer people the ability to work energetically on themselves as well, because these devices are an assist, but it's very important that people do that inner work to connect with their own bridge as well. So those are on there as well. People can find those as well. So it's ISEE Infyneregy. So it's INFI. Hang on a second. Let me just the spelling. It's so INFY NERGY. That's it. That's the one. Infyneregy.com. That's it. So yeah, and I'm very happy. There might be other inventors out there that are also interested in collaboration and things like that. So I'm very open to the possibility, if anybody, because I believe that collaboration with like minds and people who are working on other projects is a very good thing. So you can reach out to me through ISEE Infyneregy, or you can also reach out with Infinite Source Creations as well.
Well, I definitely look forward to you coming back, and we can talk more about the difference between these kind of conventional magnetic technologies and these technologies that work at a quantum level that the more highly evolved extraterrestrials use, as opposed to the lower evolved or the less evolved and the secret space programs use. Conventional electromagnetic energies that just make you sick. And that did happen to my source, JP.
Oh, really?
He got really sick, because he was being exposed to all of these harmful fields.
Right, yes.
Yeah, the groups that he was working with were not as highly evolved as the Arcturians and the Pleadians and the Elohim. But we'll talk about that more at our next interview.
Yeah, I would love to come back.
This has been fantastic. Yeah. So thank you, David.
You're very welcome. Yeah, likewise. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure and an honor being on with you. So thank you for inviting me on.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. visit exopoliticstoday.com.